Welcome back into the All Things Mizzou podcast presented by Missouri Tigers on SI. We're coming to you here in mid-June as things are developing but not developing for Mizzou football and men's basketball. Obviously, the biggest thing over the past week has been the House settlement being approved. So a new era coming to college athletics, although it's more so just evolution of the world we've been living in for the past 4 years. So excited to talk about that. We heard from Mizzou athletics director Laird Veach yesterday on all his thoughts on that and how the athletics administration is planning to move forward with that in mind. We also have the 2026 football class coming into a little bit clearer of a picture now at 4 commits. We're going to talk about the two most recent one of those. So excited to talk about that. We'll also talk about the end of Mizzou basketball hiring a new general manager. Well, their first general manager in Tim Fuller has a deep resume. So a lot to hit on today. I'm Joe Evans. I'm joined by Michael Stamps as always. Michael, let's start with this 2026 recruiting class. Just what have been your thoughts on how this class is developing?
Yeah, it's slow and steady, obviously. I think it kind of seems like the coaching staff is definitely taking their time and being very selective, which I think there's a lot more goes into that than just being selective. I think a lot of that has to do with the transfer portal, right? And being able to, add more players there who can go play right away. I think Eli Drinkwitz is going to take less players in this class. I don't know what the numbers have been the last couple of years. I'd venture around 20 to 25 guys in that range. Um, this one's probably going to be between 12 and 20 players, and it's probably going to look like that moving forward. I guess the reasoning there is one, you have more scholarship room and room on the roster to bring in players in the transfer portal. But also, if you bring in less high school recruits, it kind of seems like there's a less chance that all of them end up transferring after one season. So that's kind of a positive as well. But he's been very selective, and I feel like obviously 4 is not that much heading into the month of June, and visits are underway, and a couple guys have committed elsewhere now, and I think really only 1 or 2 of those have been big losses off the top of my head. But of the guys they have right now, I feel like it's kind of hard to complain. Obviously, Gavin Sidwar, had him before. Kind of seems like he's going to be the cornerstone for this class. He's a 4-star quarterback. You had Keenan Harris right before the official visit cycle, 4-star linebacker from St. Louis, very talented player. And then recently, you add 4-star receiver Jabari Brady from Pompano Beach, Florida, and then 3-star tight end Isaac Jensen from Omaha, like 15 minutes away from where I went to high school. So you always love to see that stuff. But like I said, Sedwar kind of seems like the cornerstone for the class, and they've done a good job of building around him already, adding a 4-star receiver and a 3-star tight end. So kind of hard to complain about who they have. I think Harris, Sedwar, and Brady are obviously, 3 very talented 4-star prospects. They're rated pretty highly by all recruiting sites, so none of them are really outliers, which I think is important. And then Jensen, he's kind of what Missouri has been recruiting at the tight end position as of late. That kind of 6'6", 230, super athletic, bigger tight end. So kind of hard to complain so far with who's in the class. And those are guys that I would imagine aren't going to go anywhere and things like that. But you have to keep building on it. Obviously, people are going to freak out if the numbers don't increase here very soon. So, and I would expect them to, and we can get into that here in a second. But kind of hard to complain about what they have so far.
Right, things can move quickly in recruiting, as we saw even over this past week, where Jensen's commitment came in just after a few days after Brady's. So things can move quickly. What you mentioned there too of the House settlement does lean into this as well. The scholarship limit for football does go from 85 to 105. Missouri is going to be devoting around $2.5 million of the cap for the revenue sharing, $2.5 million, and of that is going to go to new scholarships across all sports. It's going to be interesting to see how it plays out that and how each team utilizes those roster spots. And it is a little bit confusing too, because last year the scholarship limit, for example, for men's basketball was 13. And Missouri had 18 players on the roster. 3 of them we know were walk-ons. So 2 of those roster spots had to be basically, NIL scholarships, basically. And so we'll see how many teams, how they use the grandfathered in roster spots, and that how that all shakes out. But yeah, the transfer portal, as we've talked about before, is going to shrink these freshman classes as well. But also Missouri in general, it seems like it's been moving slower for them than the 2026 class. And we talked about that before as well. Some of it is just timing, but also just kind of shrinking down their classes. But let's talk about Jabari Brady increasing this Florida to Missouri wide receiver pipeline. Past 3 years have had one of those. And Jabari Brady, the next one in that 6'1", 205, 4-star wide receiver. Michael, what do you think of Jabari?
I just got like a deja vu feeling. I remember doing an episode at the beginning of the school year talking about, I think his name was Javon Boggs, who is a 4-star receiver from Florida who committed to Missouri, and then he would like backed out 5 times. I just had like a deja vu moment thinking about him. That was odd. But no, Jabari Brady, very talented 4-star receiver, ranked 273rd in the country, 46th best receiver. 24/7 Sports has him as a 3-star, but he's composite ranked 4-star. So for those of you who care about that. Pretty productive. He's a track athlete, so he has that track speed, 100 and 200 meter dash speed, which is pretty common among most receivers in general now. So that's not anything really crazy there, but bigger, a little bit of a bigger 6'2", 205, a little bit a bigger body, has the speed and the routes to go with it as well. Again, with the high school wide receiver, there's going to be the technical aspects of the game that they need to work on and improve upon, like footwork, like some routes and things like that. But also with these 4-star, 5-star guys, they're always going to have the athleticism. So I don't think he necessarily does like one thing super well yet. I think there's some development that needs to come along there, but definitely has the tools to contribute right away. And I think if he is going to be, I mean, I would imagine they're going to take another receiver in this class, and I know we're going to talk about that here in a second. But if they're not taking 2 or 3 receivers in the class, then he's going to have a chance to have more focused development, which I think will be important as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say his build is pretty similar to Donovan Ogbodi and James Madison as well. Donovan is 6'1", 203, and James Madison, even though he doesn't look like he's 205 pounds, he's 6'3", 205. So I don't know if that's a type thing or just kind of a coincidence, but he definitely is a bigger wide receiver. He's not a slim slot guy. But I do think, like you said, his athleticism and specifically his speed stuck out. As you mentioned, is an impressive track athlete. What stood out to me too, I mean, it's one thing to have straight line speed, but just looking at his high school tape is just the burst he has off the line of scrimmage that allows him to get some good separation. But yeah, I agreed with you. It's not like he, not to say his tape is bad because it's definitely not, but there's not one thing that jumps out of his tape that he's really specialized on. I also thought his vision after the catch was pretty good. He's pretty good after the catch, and some of that is just what comes with when you are an elite athlete playing high school teams. But also, I thought he did a really good job of kind of diagnosing the space in front of him and making the most of it. So sticking on topic with wide receivers, like you mentioned, some other guys they have their eyes on. In late May, Jabari Brady and Mason James went on the same weekend for an official visit. Mason James committed to Washington yesterday, Thursday, May 12th. So we now know what they have going on there. In June 20th through 22nd, they'll have 2 more wide receivers coming on official visits in Jaden Petit and Devion Hill-Lamar. What are your thoughts on those 2 wide receivers and kind of other guys Missouri is looking at for this class?
Jaden Pettit is a highly ranked, ranked wide receiver. Hill Lomax is a 3-star. Again, for those who care, about the star rankings, Pettit is another guy from Florida, so creating some sort of pipeline there. I know North Carolina has been a team involved. 24/7 says Oklahoma, Wisconsin, Miami are the other teams there, so something to keep an eye on. I know traditionally that's kind of hard to pull those guys out of Florida, but eventually there's so many 4-star receivers in the state of Florida that, they can't all go to Florida or Miami or Florida State. And then again, Hill Lomax is another guy I don't know a ton about. He is from Illinois, so I guess he's somewhat local. And I know they offered him a while back, but that's really all I can tell you about him. honestly, like I think they were just added to the both. They're both added to the visit list. Uh, like Wednesday or Thursday, maybe of this week. So they're kind of not surprises, but surprises a little bit. I believe Devion Hill Lomax was on Missouri's junior day list. So that's something I guess he's not like completely new, but Jaden Pettit must be a pretty recent one. And also with Hill Lomax, he's 6'4", 180 pounds, so that's kind of a unique build. He's definitely a little bit bigger, so it'll be interesting one to follow. But yeah, it's definitely fascinating that they can flip these guys around and have them on visits pretty soon. So I guess that's a positive.
First takeaway is it sounds like I was 0 for 2 on pronouncing their last names, but that's all right. Um, I
It's a crapshoot.
Yeah. You gotta take your best guess. Yeah, I mean, Hill Lomax, he's from Edwardsville, which is pretty close to Nick Haken's from Belleville West. So they are pretty close, even though they're from Illinois. Don't it's not Chicago, it's right across the river from St. Louis. So yeah, we'll see the developments there. And I wouldn't be surprised if, like you mentioned, it was kind of a reaction to where things were headed with Mason James. All right, on to Isaac Jensen. Like we've talked about before with Darren Cato, if you are a tight end over 6'5" and 230 pounds, he is probably going to take a look at you. And Isaac Jensen fits both those 6'6", 230 coming from Omaha. This pipeline is not as strong as the wide receivers from Florida pipeline, but there is something to be said about the tight ends from border states that go to Missouri. You have Jordan Harris from Arkansas. This is really just something I've been paying attention to. Jordan Harris from Arkansas, Dakota Terrell is from Oklahoma. You have Vince Brown, even, who is from Illinois. And now you have Isaac Jensen from Nebraska. Like you said, Michael, playing pretty close to you in Omaha. What are your thoughts on him? I'm sure you've heard about him throughout his high school career.
Are we missing any other border states? I'm not good at geography. Are there any? Is that all of them?
I
I
mean, Gavin
can't.
Hoffman is from Kansas. They
Okay.
don't have. I don't believe there's any tight end from Iowa on the roster right now.
Okay. So we'll have to keep that in mind. No, Isaac Jensen, like you said, he's a bigger body. It's clearly a mold for what the staff in Durham Cato is looking for at 6'6", 230. Another one. He's just a good athlete. I think he's also pretty impressive after the catch for being 6'6", 230. One thing that he was really blessed with in high school and will for another year is he has a four-star quarterback passing to him in Jet Tamala, who's committed to Iowa State for the time being. I have a feeling that's not going to last very long. He just took an official visit to Alabama. So that's another local kid that I've had the chance to talk to. So that's pretty cool stuff because you don't see kids from Nebraska coming to Alabama all the time. So cool stuff there. But regardless, he's had a good quarterback passing to him. So that always helps with stats and things like that. But I think he has really good hands for a big man, and I think he's really good. Really good after the catch, and really his receiving part of the game is pretty polished. I feel like most high school tight ends don't always have a full grasp on blocking schemes and things like that. So that is one thing that's going to have to come along. But I feel like that really hasn't been much of an issue. And honestly, what he does and the way he's built, I don't know. I mean, he's going to have to block because tight ends block, but I have a feeling that's not going to be his main thing. He really is a pretty dynamic receiving threat. So I think it's pretty impressive for his size and then his speed as well. And again, really good hands for a big guy and pretty good routes as well. Again, you can always get more technical, but I think the hands and the speed for a guy of his size really stand out to me.
Yeah, watching him, he plays pretty much just like a big, tall wide receiver, basically. I mean, he does have blocking tape as well. And again, just because of the nature that comes with when you're big and athletic in high school, as a blocker, you can sometimes dominate cornerbacks and linebackers even. But yeah, I mean, he's going deep on a lot of these routes. He seems like a real deep threat, like you mentioned. I thought his route running was pretty solid for tight end. I I have in my notes, okay, H back explanation point, because there was one play where he took a snap at H back. Um, and then, I mean, blocking wise, like we said, you can only take that so much. But he has a lot of it on tape. I thought he used his back pretty well to kind of anchor himself down, give himself some leverage there. And it does look like he has some more room to grow into his frame. And we've seen that over the past few years where a guy comes in to Missouri as a tight end and after his freshman year adds on like 20 pounds. So I wouldn't be surprised to see that be the case. And it's pointless even to look at the roster and say, okay, here's who's going to be here once he gets into town, and here's how he fits on into that future depth chart, because we have no clue who is going to be on the roster next year. We have no clue. I mean, Isaac Jensen, who even knows with that? So not going to take the look too far into that.
Yeah, I have two things. One, there's going to be so much like raw potential in that tight end room by the time Isaac Jensen rolls around with him and Hoffman and Dakota Terrell. I mean, you'd imagine that Norfleet. I mean, we could tentatively say Norfleet might be gone, so that would obviously shake things up there. But that's a lot of fun. An interesting thing with Jensen committing so early, and this was one of the guys that wasn't surprising that he committed right away at all. Like he picked up, if you take any, whatever into the crystal ball system and recruiting predictions and things like that. I like to throw them out there just because they do exist and sometimes have some, truth to them. But he picked up a on three prediction like a while ago, like months back. So way before the visit. So the fact that he committed right after the visit wasn't really surprising. He was a guy that you kind of thought coming in was going to be a guy who could make a decision pretty fast. But it did create some interesting like ripple effect in the recruiting because Missouri had 4-star tight end Evan Jacobson visit the week before that. He was in the first weekend of visits. And then we're supposed to have 3-star tight end Kevin Sullivan, 3-star tight end PJ McFarland visit, not this week. It'll be like the June 20 through 22 visit section. And now all those guys are going elsewhere. So Jensen kind of created a domino effect there. And Jacobson hasn't committed yet, but it won't be to Missouri. And then Kevin Sullivan, who is, I think he's from Rockhurst, Missouri. I don't know where that is, but Kansas City area maybe. And then PJ McFarland. Kevin Sullivan committed to Kansas, and then PJ McFarland to Indiana. So the tight end room and recruiting situation is set. This was kind of interesting to see how the dominoes fell there.
Yeah, Rockhurst is in the Kansas City area. Yeah, agree on the tight end front. Looking at running backs, this is kind of a position where you're going to kind of have at least one of these in every class as well. What are your thoughts on some of the running backs they've had in lately? TJ Hodges, I know, was just on a visit this past week along with Maxwell Warner.
Ryan Estrada is kind of a fast rising one, and at this point, I would say he's the most like exciting / intriguing of the running backs that they've pursued. He's taking a lot of other visits, so it wouldn't really surprise me to see him not go to Missouri. Alabama is on the docket. I think he went to Minnesota, and he did go to Michigan right around the same time that he went to Missouri. And I think Alabama's coming up here soon. So obviously a lot of heavy hitters. Now, like I said, he's still rising up recruiting rankings. So maybe some like an Alabama or Michigan won't take a flyer on him. I don't know what or who they have at running back in their classes yet, but would be safe to assume that they're going to be on some big ones. Estrada's the 310th best player in the country, but he was, mid-level 3-star earlier in the year. So he's rising pretty fast. I think that would be one where if Missouri does land him, he's going to continue to fly up the rankings again if people take those into account. Maxwell Warner is kind of I don't want to say the safe option, but he's definitely the lowest rated one. Kind of came on late as a surprise visitor last weekend. He's ranked 1,069th in the country, so doesn't have a ton of great offers. But I mean, if they think they're safe at the position and Maxwell Warner is a guy that'll come on, then it can't hurt. TJ Hodges is another. I don't want to say he's a mystery because it's a guy that they've clearly been involved with for a really long time, but very quiet recruitment. I don't really have much to say about him. He was a surprise visitor, even though Missouri's been a team that seems like it's at the top of his list for quite some time. But again, like I haven't been able to get a hold of him. And then if you search around, like there's not really much anybody said about him. So pretty quiet recruitment process. But he's the highest ranked of the bunch. He's from Arkansas, so pull another guy from Arkansas. I guess that's always a win. But he's a very talented player. They'll take one guy, maybe two. If they take two running backs, one of them will likely be Maxwell Warner. Um, I don't expect them to take. I wouldn't expect them to take Estrada and Hodges, but I guess crazier things have happened. So that'll be interesting to see how it shakes out. I think I would be surprised if like the guy that take is not one of those three. That probably won't happen, but I don't know which of the three it's going to be. I don't have a crystal ball, so it'll be interesting to see how that goes.
Yeah, the one thing I would say about Estrada is he is from El Dorado, Texas, or El Paso. Um, El Dorado is high school, and Curtis Luper does have some pretty strong ties to Texas in that area from his previous coaching stop. So they have that going for them at least. Outside of running back, though, Mike Coleman, what are your thoughts on just who could be next for Missouri for this 2026 class?
Yeah, there's a short list of guys, and I think at the top of that list is four-star athlete Jaden McGregory. He's from Des Moines. They likely view him as a safety. I believe most teams do. So that'll be an interesting one to keep an eye on. He was just on campus this last weekend for an official visit. He's been to Minnesota as well, and he commits on July 7th. So I guess we won't have a decision from him for quite some time. But that's a guy to keep an eye on for sure. Another one I'm keeping an eye on is J.J. Bush. He's a guy that Missouri has really been involved with for what seems like probably the beginning of his recruitment. He was on campus on May 30, so that first crop of official visits was at Cincinnati last weekend, is doing LSU this weekend, and then Arkansas the one after. He's from Arkansas, so that might be one to keep an eye on. But LSU is also LSU, so that'll be another one to keep an eye on. But Missouri is going to be a team that's closely involved there. Four-star offensive tackle Evan Goodwin. I've talked to him multiple times. He's our ping pong guy. So shout out to Evan Goodwin. He's visiting around his Final Four schools. So not really any information, but just the way he talks about Missouri, and I think also the fit out of the rest of his other four schools: Mississippi State, Oklahoma State, SMU. I really think Missouri would be the best fit, like scheme wise. So that's going to be something to keep an eye on. That's more of just like a gut feeling, not really hearing anything there. And then three-star offensive lineman Khalif Canty Jr. is another really interesting one. He's going to be on campus for an official visit on June 20 to June 22. He's like really, really rapidly rising up recruiting rankings. So I think this would be a great get if they can get him. If they don't get Canty, if they don't get Canty or Goodwin, then you're looking at a serious issue. But Canty is really like the only like kind of the last interior prospect that they have off the top of my head that's still available to get. So I guess Brandon Anderson's one. I forgot about him and Braylon Ellison as well. But Canty is definitely rising up recruiting rankings. I think he still has an official visit to Michigan State and took one to North Carolina recently. That would be a big one, but if they don't get him, I don't really know where they go. Noah Best just committed to Oklahoma, so that was a guy they had on official visit. So if they don't get Canty, I don't really know what happens after that. He has a commitment date coming soon. It's June 23, which is like right after his visit to Missouri. So that could be a coincidence or maybe a sign. I don't know, because that commitment date is pretty new. So that's really the next four up, I would say.
All right, that's going to wrap up our recruiting talks for football. On to the House settlement. I'm not going to spend too much time rehashing all of the changes it brings. We have a lot of reporting on that on our website, but basically the most important thing being able to directly share revenue with players. 20.5 million cap space for schools right now. That's going to increase over the next 10 years. There's also a whole host of other legislation still playing out with all the Title IX implications, with the SCORE Act, and a few other bills that are trying to be passed for setting the standard legality-wise. There's the politics of it with athletic administrations not wanting the student athletes to be considered employees because of all of the leverage that sort of gives them. So there's a lot going on with it still, but this House settlement is certainly the first big domino to fall in this whole chain. And so Laird Veach, the first thing I wanted to bring up with what he had to say yesterday, because the first three questions he got asked were about how Missouri is actually going to split up that revenue. Each school gets to decide how they want to share their revenue across the sports, because obviously the revenue each sports team brings is going to be different across schools. And they also decide what schools they actually involve in revenue sharing. And so Laird Veach didn't want to share the exact distribution. There's been some other schools that have chosen to, but he said of strategic competitive reasons, they don't find a reason to, which I think is fair enough. I also don't see how it would put them at a disadvantage, but I don't see the benefit they gain from it necessarily, unless there'd be some benefit um, for their boosters wise to show what they're putting that toward. But either way, I thought it was interesting he decided not to. I also thought it would be interesting to look at what schools who have released that information, what they're choosing to do, just to kind of get a better estimate of what Missouri might be doing. So LSU is one school that has announced this distribution. So um, most schools, a lot of it is going to be going toward football and men's basketball. More stated, a lot of it's going to be going toward football just because of obvious reasons for the revenue that brings in. So for LSU, across the SEC, it seems like every school is going to be doing $2.5 million for new scholarships. That's something Missouri is doing as well. That's one thing Beach confirmed. So it's really 18 million that is going toward actually paying players. And so for LSU, 75% of it is going toward football. It equates to about 13 million. Men's basketball, 15%, so just under 3 million. Women's basketball, a little under a million, 5%. And then the rest of the sports that are participating in revenue sharing, getting 5% share, and that's a little under a million. And I thought LSU specifically was an interesting example for this because of the fact that they are obviously successful at football, maybe not as much in men's basketball, but are in the SEC. So there's going to be a certain price you have to pay to compete there, but also really successful in a lot of other sports. So, I I think it's telling that they have 5% going, only 5% going to the rest of their sports for a really successful baseball and gymnastics program there. Um, and so I'd be interested to see, because the difficult thing with talking about NIL and the revenue sharing is just we have no clue. We've had no clue over the past 4 years what the actual numbers have been for NIL. I mean, we know we have reported numbers of here's how much Arch Manning is making, here's how much Bo Peep is making. We know for the stars, we have a general idea, but it's difficult to tell the exact details of that. And then also just like, is there a benefit to transferring to a new team just because you're a new, shiny, marketable player? And so it's difficult to tell, but I think those numbers are interesting to look at. Um, and I just want to throw into the two details he did provide as far as the distribution for it. Um, we know they're investing in women's sports, and specifically women's basketball, um, more than they have in past years, and also baseball, to a certain extent, as Laird Veach has said, that they haven't invested at the level they needed to. Um, but I'd imagine investing at the level they need to be competitive. If LSU is doing little under a million across baseball, gymnastics, and whatever other sports they have in it, I'd imagine softball too. That kind of gives you the idea of what that competitiveness in the SEC requires. I would also say LSU does have the benefit for all of those sports of the fact that because they're successful, athletes like marketability is a lot, more just on its own. They've had, I would say, more than any other schools, real stars in baseball and gymnastics over the past few years. So there's more brand value to those sports in general. So Michael, any thoughts on how Mizzou is planning to spend out their money, and the fact that they're not sharing it publicly?
Yeah, I mean, a couple things. One, it's kind of nice to have some of this information and data and these numbers contextualized because it seems like we've been talking in generalizations when we talk about revenue sharing and NIL, and we still really are. Like, it's still obviously very unclear, and I honestly don't think this is ever going to be something we fully understand because there's a business side to it, like you said, there's a political side to it, and it's just going to keep getting more confusing, and there's going to be new rules and things are taken away, and it's just going to be it's going to be something that's fully hard to grasp for as long as we're covering college athletics. I really believe, but it is nice, like I said, that we have some sort of baseline context for how this information is going to be applied to Missouri directly. Um, I was thinking a lot about if I liked or disliked or even cared that he wouldn't disclose how it's being shared. And honestly, like I think for Missouri as a school, people expect the money to go to football and men's basketball, and uh, like like for the fans, I don't know if they're really going to care where it goes outside of that. So it doesn't really matter, in my opinion, um, where if he says it right now or not. I don't think it's going to have an impact on the fan base. It will have an impact on the donors and who's giving money to where, but I don't think that that's a decision right now that is too controversial. But yeah, that's really it. It's nice to hear that maybe there's going to be more of a boost to baseball because that was obviously a disappointing program. The unfortunate thing, or I mean, fortunate slash unfortunate thing, with revenue sharing is there's only so much money to go around, right? And some sports that need to be touched with this money just aren't because there's just not going to be enough. You look at a gymnastics, so probably a baseball. Um, Things like that. It makes you wonder. Like I don't know off the top of my head which sports are like which ones aren't impacted by revenue sharing, but like track and field is one that comes to mind. I don't know if that gets any love from this. Um, but then there are the ones like volleyball and then women's basketball, like you mentioned, that probably is going to be getting a little bit more love. Like volleyball has obviously been, I mean, nationally has seen a really big boom, in viewership and fan base and things like that. Missouri obviously had a good season, so interesting to see how that goes. And I think just not really anything new to add, but it's good that they're investing in Kelly Harper. It's a good time for her. I mean, I'm sure she loves the fact that she's here right now. It's probably music to her ears if she knew this was happening or not. But yeah, I don't really have anything new or crazy to add. You hit the nail on the head. It's still, like I said, I think it's still really confusing. And we know what we know right now, but it's only going to get more complex, and there's going to be twists and turns and things like that. I'm sure there'll be ways to bend the rules, which is going to be interesting to follow. Um, it's going to be interesting to follow because obviously this is kind of a whole other dimension of this, but the way NIL worked before was these collectives just handing out money, and that doesn't really seem like uh, it's going to be the case. So it'll be interesting to see how that works. And, it makes you wonder that in this last transfer portal cycle for football and men's basketball, if, teams are just throwing out money left and right to get their players. So because they knew that their collective was going to be done and that this revenue sharing was going to start. So that's something interesting to think about. I mean, we could probably go on and on and on, but yeah, it is nice to have some context now, I think is my big overarching theme.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the biggest thing. And it'll be interesting to see. I haven't seen too many people talking about Missouri deciding not to share that information, but to see what the reaction to it is. The one thing that I thought of was just it could, at least for the coaches' perspective, for different teams, could set transparent expectations for what a coach is working with. But at the end of the day, the fans aren't the ones deciding whether or not to fire a coach. So,
I will say also, like, and this is going to sound really common sense, but now is like you almost have to have a general manager now. And I know we're going to talk about
mhm.
Tim Fuller here in a second, but you almost have to have one because if I'm a head coach, I don't want to deal with this. Like,
Yeah,
it's confusing. There's so many rules and caveats and loopholes. Like, I don't want to deal with it. It shouldn't be a coach's responsibility to have to deal with it and work with it, because it's not. I mean, it's you're not a coach; you're a businessman at that point. So it's good that the general manager role, I think, is one that's been created. It sounded kind of ridiculous in first, like, oh, we're not in professional sports, but with all this happening, like, you absolutely need it. So I think like I said, we're going to talk about Tim Fuller here in a second. But just nationally, in general, I think it's good that that role has been created because that's a lot to keep up with if you're a head coach.
Right, and the lines between professional and college is getting more blurry. I mean, to a certain extent, I mean, I would absolutely consider the definition of professional to apply to college athletes now. And I think we're just seeing, I'm not going to get into too much of my opinions on the um not the ethics or morality, but the justice of it all. But I think we're just seeing the NCAA that has been pushing back against this for so long, and it obviously came to just it exploded in 2021 when NIL was legalized, and now obviously with the $2 billion they have to pay back to former athletes and deciding how to split all of that up is going to be a whole challenge. And we're just kind of seeing, I there was like a fable or some story they taught us in third grade of like digging yourself further down a hole. It was about lying. The NCAA, I'm not accusing them of lying, but digging down this hole, pushing it back. I mean, I'm sure in general, but like pushing this back, and now we're just seeing it all coming to a massive issue that they're having to solve.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned it a little bit too, and this is another kind of a general thing, but think about how long people have been complaining about this and how long of coaches. I mean, how many times do we hear Eli Drinkwitz say, I don't want to do anything or say anything until I know what's going on. I don't even know what's going on." Like, it's even if it's what they have in place right now isn't perfect, the fact that there is clarity and like boundaries and rules and regulations for how all this can operate, like even from like an elementary level at the simplest level, that's a really positive thing, even if it's not the most perfect overall concept right now. The fact that there is like boundaries and regulations for what can be done, what can't be done with like this, the commission and all these things, and I also think that's a big positive. So even if it is still confusing and all that stuff, at least at the very minimum, you know, we know what they can and can't do now.
Right, and that's what Laird Veach yesterday talked about when I asked him about what do you really mean when we talk about bringing college athletics to a more stable point of there is now structure, there is now clear rules, at least we think, and there is more just uniformity of what rules to follow, and the NIL Go clearinghouse is a big part of that as well. And ultimately, I think that's just what was most important was just getting an even playing field, and a clear understanding of the rules. So that's that. Um, as far as Mizzou's revenue and splitting that up, um, the reporting on this has been that by 10 years with the cap increasing, that at some point it could get to around 50% of what college athletic departments bring in that they're having to share with players, to be competitive. So Larry Veach talked about having to find little corners to cut, and all of that and unnecessary expenses. So we'll have to see how some of that goes into effect over the next few years. There's also finding different ways to build revenue, and I think it is good that you can build the pitch to fans of like, unlike a professional sports team where like I think of the Green Bay Packers and being an owner of the team, having stock in the team, like it doesn't really mean anything besides just like supporting a new project. But with college athletics, like literally just buying a ticket to the game helps, like helps your field or helps your team on the field. So I think they can make that pitch easy enough. A big part of that is the North End Zone project and the big renovations to Faurot Field. I don't think it's a coincidence that a lot of the seating they're adding is suites, which can obviously be used to grow some more passion amongst fans with more open pockets. and also suites are going to be more expensive. So Laird Veach talked about that, and not only cutting costs for this year and really having to look at the bigger picture of like, okay, we got to do what we can. This is pretty much our financial situation for the this next year or so, and then after that, we'll start to see the benefits of the North End Zone project come in, the benefits of new TV deals for the SEC come in, and all of that. So a lot to follow over the next 3 years. Like you said, Michael, it's only the start still, I would say. Moving on to the general manager, Tim Fuller, coming over to Missouri men's basketball. Laird Veach also talked about this. And like you said, Michael, there's obvious reason to have this here. And Dennis Gates talked about the reason of wanting to bring one in. And we talked about this in prior episode as well, of just all that there is to manage, especially during the season and even during the tournament. When you have to consider all of the roster retention for next year and all of the disorder of the calendar. But Tim Fuller coming over, we talked about what are they actually going to hire in this, and like the resume of the person they hired was going to tell us a lot about this. Were they going to do what some of our other schools did and just hire a former player? Or were they going to go for the more business side of it? Were they going to go for a former coach because they're creating a new role? And so Tim Fuller, oddly enough, is perfectly suited to be a basketball general manager at the college level. Can you talk a little bit about his resume and experience, Michael?
A little bit bummed it wasn't a former player. Kind of made our predictions kind of boring. But no, it makes perfect sense. The thing that stands out the most to me about his resume is the overtime elite stuff. Like quick rundown overtime elite. I actually don't even know how to fully describe it, but it's like a separate league where high schoolers or high school or prospective NBA players, I guess. So people will come from overseas as well. Will go and it's like a little league, and they play basketball against each other. That's kind of how that works. But plenty of NBA talent came from there, including like Alex Sarr, who is second overall pick. He's in the Washington Wizards. Rob Dillingham, the Thompson twins, who obviously made a name for themselves in the NBA this year. So I think a lot of overtime elite was about marketing players and boosting draft stock and making them more appealing to the NBA scouts. So from that aspect and like a marketing perspective, I think that I think that's really impressive. Obviously, he has a playing career, which I think is also very important. Executive at Nike, which it's more, like I said, more marketing and things like that. So he definitely has the business mind, which I think is really important. And then he has some coaching experience as well. So he checks multiple boxes. And again, this general point here, it's going to be one less thing that Dennis Gates doesn't have to do, which I think is going to be really important. And you would have to think, it's kind of similar to when you hear a recruit talk about, oh, I want to play for this wide receiver coach or this running back coach because they've pushed multiple players to the NBA or to the NFL, excuse me. It's going to be a similar idea for Fuller. He's coached or helped multiple players get to the NBA, especially with overtime elite. So I think that's going to be kind of the most intriguing thing. I think that's going to be something he's able to help with, along with the NIL stuff.
Right. So I think Tim Fuller is not only an asset to this program, not only for what he can take off Dennis Gates and the rest of the coaching staff plate, but just because of his deep resume, I think is just another proven recruiter on that staff that can help them out. So we'll be hearing from Tim Fuller this Saturday for the first time. Don't believe we'll be hearing from Dennis Gates on the hire until around September, October, right before the season. But it seems like hit a pretty good hire with this first general manager for the program. Anything to add on Tim Fuller or the rest of everything we talked about today, Michael?
No, I think following the rest of the summer recruiting wise will be interesting to see. No slate of official visits this weekend, but next weekend will be a big one. It's June 20th through the 22nd. So that'll be a big one. And then, yeah, I think obviously no general manager for football yet, but it'll be interesting to see if if this hire maybe sets a standard of some sort. If Eli Drinkwitz decides to go that way, so that'll be something to keep an eye on as well.
Yeah, and Drinkwitz had talked about possibly hiring a general manager in April, and he said that wasn't something where they were interested in at the time. Um, and he said then that it was because of a, like you had mentioned earlier, kind of well, like we don't know what the landscape, what the rules are going to look like in a few months here. So there's a little bit more understanding of that now. He had also mentioned at the time of the power structure it creates, where in professional sports, at least, the general manager is above the head coach. And so I asked Lertovich about that the other day of, what do you expect that to look like for the men's basketball program? And he had said something kind of along the lines of what we had talked about of every program is going to have different expectations for the general manager. And it isn't just this one thing that we see in professional sports. And it really is just, seems like for Dennis Gates' program, at least, going to be kind of an additional role on the coaching staff, just like there's director of player personnel is already on teams that are mostly scouts for high school players. There's going to be somebody that's helping out a lot more with transfer portal, negotiating contracts, but it isn't going to be a full roster control and decision making control that the general manager is in charge of. So interesting to follow over the next few years how Mizzou is going to react to these changes. But that's how we have for you today here on the All Things Mizzou podcast. We appreciate you tuning in and hope you do the same for all the rest of our coverage over at Missouri Tigers on SI.